days, 11 days, restored 11 days, not 11.1 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 days, 11 days. 11 days. Not 11.1.
Community.
11 days. Not 11.1.
Community.
11 days. Not 11 days. Not 11 days. 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 So architects and designers. 11 days. 11 actually. 11 days. As early as the 40s and 50s. 11 days. 11 days. 11 days. 11 days. 11 days. Buildings again. 11 days. 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 11 days.
Red hair, R-E-D-E-_. Red hair, R-E-D-E-R, R-E-D-E-R.
Great.
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 R-E-D-E-R.
state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Now, you spoke to both local and state officials about these boarding care. Boarding care homes, they agree the decline is inefficient about these boarding care homes, they agree the decline is inefficient about these boarding care homes, they agree the decline is Air. Ring. Go. Air. Ring. Go. Air. Ring. Go. Ring. Go.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Octatrack video. So today, I did another jam, And now that I have my whole setup here, I just wanted to give it a round 2 try and play with the setup that I had previously, just with a few more rules attached. Last week I had somewhat of a setup already, but this week I wanted to sort of set that in stone a little bit more. I didn't get a chance to talk about it last week, so I'll give you a quick overview of what I have set up here. And this is, again, as I usually stress, this is my personal setup. This is not anything that I necessarily recommend exactly for you. I say go into your Octatrack, figure out what you need, what's best for you, and go from there. But basically what we've got here is 4 flex machines on the left. 2 of them are dedicated to rhythm. So I have my kick at the very bottom. I have a hi-hat sort of thing going on in track 3, which I switched around during the set, as you'll notice. A bass line sort of thing going on here. I have nothing going on in track 1 yet. This is my sample track, so I wanted to dedicate a single track to just kind of less rhythmically bound things. So for track 5, I have all of the things that I want that are just samples, basically. And they're not just like melodic samples. I actually made it a point to not use melodic samples this time around because I feel like they tend to be a bit prescriptive. It's like you listen to it, at least for me, I listen to it and I'm like, okay, this is how it should sound. This is what I'm going to harmonize with when I hear the, and that's probably just because I have a really big music theory background. So that's kind of what works for me, is to have some sort of a track that doesn't necessarily have music to it so that it works. It's like having a rap vocal or something. In fact, I would recommend using a rap vocal for something like this. I just didn't rip any for this particular. And also, like, YouTube's got all this crazy copyright stuff. Not crazy, but it's just not as easy to use YouTube or rap lyrics as easy as it is to use, like, say, NPR that I sampled off the radio. But in any case, I've got the sample track here. I've got my drum chain here, which is quite convenient. So that lets me kind of play in some things. I didn't quite use that as much as I would have wanted to, but we'll get to some of the sort of my thoughts on the set. I literally just finished this like 2 minutes ago, and then I started recording this feedback thing. So on my track 7, I have basically my synth. So my OB6 is going into, and you can't actually see it here, but it's right here. And my OB6 is going into the Octatrack via this through machine. And you'll notice I did some cool stuff with it as far as triggering the actual So it's like actually triggering the I'm basically gating the input of the synth as it goes into the Octatrack. And so then that keeps me from going to the MIDI page, which I kind of minimized as much as possible. There's 8 tracks here already, and I'm doing plenty without having to go over to the MIDI channel or to the MIDI page and like figure out what I'm going to do over there. So most of the time I spent holding down chords. I have a sustain pedal down here, so I would just use the sustain pedal, hold that down, and then create some sort of a gate with what I was playing. And just sort of let the rhythm that I had programmed into the sequencer do a lot of the work. I could have also played stuff. I'm a pianist by trade, but seeing as I'm trying to mix things live and introduce new samples and blah, 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 I figured this was just a way better use of my time. That's pretty much the general overview. I think it's important to go over some general rules that I had for myself and why I designed it this way. To start, I started with all of these samples, sample tracks, the flex machines, on the left side because I figured muting it would be a lot easier with one hand if it's on the left side. I don't really need to mute the OB6 very much, nor do I really intend to mute the sample. I opted instead, as you might have noticed, to use one-shot trigs to, or trigless trigs to mute the sample. So for example, if I was just playing this,
officials about these boarding care homes. Did officials about these boarding care homes. Did officials about these boarding officials. Did officials about these boarding officials about
Oops,
these
hold
boarding
on.
care homes. Did officials about these boarding care homes. Did officials.
Yeah, so I basically used these trigless trigs so that I could gate certain parts of the sample. That was something that I thought about for a while because, for example, I don't like that. I don't really like going into multiple pages within the set because I feel like it just confuses the hell out of me. I don't want to spend any time during an improvised set like this, paging through 4 different pages trying to figure out how the sample got triggered. I would much rather see everything that's going on one page, and you can really extend the complexity of a single bar by introducing little things. And so you could argue that I'm basically trading one time-consuming task for another. So instead of having multiple pages, I'm actually telling this trig to play every 2 times, which lets me play the whole sample the first time, and then the second time around, it mutes it. So yeah, I do agree that it would have been nice if I didn't have to scroll to exactly 2 out of 2 within the conditional trigs. But I think it serves the purpose, and at least for now, it's the easiest way for me to make a 1-bar sequence feel longer than 1 bar. Okay, so for the bass line, I felt like this OB6, which you still can't see, it's right here. The OB6 was my way of introducing some of the polyphony into the space, but I didn't want to focus too hard on polyphony, and especially like knowing that there are a lot of moving pieces, I didn't want to trap myself in a particular key or a particular chord progression. So I pretty much made it sure that the OB6 was the only melodic component of the set. And I could have also plugged in my OP1 and used that a little bit, but I figured since this is one of my first improvised sets in a while, the other one being last week, I didn't want to add too many moving parts. So I just started with a really simple, just bass saw note. And so,
Did officials about these boarding care homes.
and you'll notice that it's on kind of a cool sequence here. It's actually 12 out of 16 steps, which kind of gives you this feel that it's longer. Once again, like I wanted to extend the life of a single page of the sequencer without having to page through and like program a bunch of different stuff. So this allowed me to play with a lot more rhythmic complexity. You'll notice that the master pattern is at 64 steps. So even if I do have
Did officials about these boarding care homes. Did officials.
So even if I do have this track, yeah, even if I have the pattern set to 12 steps here, because it's on a 64-step pattern, it will repeat every 4 bars. So it still gives you something to anticipate, which, like, I don't know why that's so important to me, but I haven't gotten that far into techno to abandon that particular sort of safety net. Anyway, so besides the fact that I didn't really want to play with bass lines all that much, I didn't want to have like a dedicated instrument for bass lines or anything like that. I also made sure that I didn't play with the kick too much. In the past, and I don't know if I did this last week, but I would take like a single kick loop, and then I would play with it for a while, and then I would switch it out for like a different loop, and sometimes that would cause some delays. So instead of doing that, I was just like, okay, this time I'm just going to choose 1 bass drum, 1 kick, and just use the rhythm of that to play with the track. Like 30 minutes is not enough time for you to feel like you need a different kick, I think, personally. It's not like I'm, chugging along listening to a mix and I'm like, oh wow, I haven't heard a different kick in a while. So I figured I would let that be one of the constants. Given the fact that I have, 7 tracks to juggle, minimizing the amount of things that you're thinking about at any given time is pretty important. That sort of keeps the kick at a fairly steady rate. And actually, you could sort of think about it this way too. Each particular track is not just like an anything goes type situation. I'm actually trying to figure out which element of each track I want to play with. So With track 2, well, first of all, I don't even use track 1. So I'm actually working with 6 tracks. Track 2, I have a bass line, and most of what I'm playing with is the ADSR and the envelope for the filter. I did adjust the key a couple times to make sure that it was in key with the rest of the what was going on, but I also didn't really play with changing the pitch too much. I would map it to a scene to kind of generate interest. But that was kind of the limitations of what I wanted to do with the bass line. Track 3 being my sort of hi-hat track. I barely did anything to, actually. You'll notice that I went from, I switched it to sort of a linear slicing function here. It used to be just one trigger and it would play the whole thing. For most of the set it was like that, and then I think when we got into a sort of a swing section, I switched it over to this so that it would apply the swing to that particular track. If you're confused, just leave a comment and I will elaborate in text. With the bass drum, I barely touched anything except the distortion near the end because I didn't like the way that the kick sounded, and that was kind of winding down already anyway. And I kind of just focused on saying, okay, this pattern is exactly what I'm expected to sound like. It's just going to be a kick every time. So I played with it sometimes. I did switch out the kick, I think once or twice. But for the most part, I wanted it to stay fairly simple, so I didn't have to, spend too much time sound designing the kick. Track 5, what did I do?
Did officials about these.
Right, so this sample, I could have played a lot with pitch or things like that, but instead I really just wanted to have it be this constant, this longer sample that would play. Right now it's at 1 bar, but for the most part it was at 2 bars, which is longer than most of the other tracks that I had in my set. And so I kind of wanted this to be one of the constants in the set. I didn't really want to play too much with this either, except when I took it out and brought it in. Track 6, I pretty much used specifically so that I could create the sort of, the very satisfying, like, clap on the 2 and 4.
Did officials about these boarding care. Did officials about these boarding care.
And then every once in a while to have the satisfaction of
officials about these boarding care. Did officials about
the satisfaction of doing something like that. But aside from that, I barely touched anything else in that chain. Track 7 was sort of my wild card. And I could have played a little bit more with it, but I think given how much you can do with the OB6, I didn't want to get lost playing with it. I wanted to make sure that the set was the priority in this particular case. At the very beginning, you'll notice I did a bit more experimenting, and honestly, I would say, like, in the future, I would probably want to dial that back even more, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I was playing with the LFO on the filter, but then I also had a filter, like, I have a filter pedal down here, so you might have noticed that if I wasn't touching anything, that, like, the filter would change in a very human way. That's my foot. But anyway, I didn't really know how I wanted to control the filter. Later, as the set sort of matured, I got more comfortable with the idea of using the foot filter as a means of increasing the intensity of the track. I completely scrapped the use of the LFO, and I focused mostly on controlling the filter by way of the trigger envelope here.
Did officials about these boarding care. 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 Did officials about these boarding.
And basically, I spent most of my time just sort of like holding down a note. Occasionally, I would map it to the MIDI page, but you'll notice if you watch it again, like, I did make a couple mistakes trying to map it to MIDI. So it's like the moment I tried using MIDI, I got burned. So, like, I think there are a number of things that I really enjoyed about that set. I think I got into the groove as things developed a little bit more. I played with all the tracks fairly equally, which is kind of what I had hoped. Certain things that I could have improved. I think I relied on the sort of the chord holding thing a little bit more than I needed to. And honestly, I think that's partially because of the way that the OB6, it has a very powerful sound, and it has a ton of options, and it's like you could basically, I could just completely scrap this and just be playing on the OB6 for, 30 minutes. And I wouldn't even need, beats and stuff. So it's like, it's very easy for me to want to do that. So I kind of curved that a lot. That being said, there are certain things I really like about using the OB6 that I can't do on the OP1, for example. And I mean, obviously you're going to be like, well, yeah, it's a fucking analog synth with like one knob per function. What I'm really trying to say is like, I can't hold chords on the OP1 very easily. I have to go into a bunch of menus, and sometimes the keys are so easy to play that you end up like going into a different synth. I can't control the filter with like with my foot while I'm holding down a note and like adjusting, different parameters. Like those things are really nice. So I would actually pretty much enjoy using the OB6 once again and just focusing on either using chords or using ARPs or something like that. I think what it is that I just need to get more comfortable with how this is going to fit into the greater set. Everything else is pretty good. I will say that before I started this set, since last week, I did go into my file browser and do a bit of cleaning up. I used to have a bunch of folders depending on like who created the sample pack. I don't have time for that. I kind of just like threw a bunch of samples into one folder that I knew would be related. So for example, track 3, this True Grit hat sample is in a folder with like a ton of other samples. And they're all percussion samples that have no melodic content to them. So they would work with anything. I did the same thing with track 5, and these FM tracks that you're seeing, these are all samples that I made like 30 minutes before my set. And basically it was just the OP1 with the antenna recording different radio channels, FM channels. But that was sort of the hope, was that I would know exactly where the melodic stuff was and exactly where the non-melodic stuff was. So when I muted it, I would get some muscle memory as to which things to mute. Perhaps if I did it again, I would put track 5 over to track 1. I did mute track 5 occasionally, and that is a little bit uncomfortable. It's a lot easier to do this. What else? I would say that like as far as changing out samples, it wasn't too painful. I think really the main thing is to just get comfortable with the setup. I'll probably do a setup fairly similar to this next time. Some sort of a synth plugged into the through machine. Focusing mostly on actually sequencing. I guess one other thing that I would do is maybe play a little bit more, be a little bit more adventurous with the pattern and what was going on with the OB6. I think if I listen back, I anticipate that I'm going to notice a bit of rigidness as far as what was playing from the OB6. I think it's because I had a certain pattern and I would get kind of precious about it and I wouldn't want to get rid of it. So I would just like hold on to this one pattern and I wouldn't try anything new for a while. I think near the end I got a little bit more risky where I would just clear the whole thing and just randomly select trigs. But early on I would like hold on to one particular pattern and just like keep it held there for like the entire set. So I think as far as like lessons learned, I probably want to spend a little bit more time exploring each section. I think early on with this kind of thing, I get kind of eager to switch up samples and sort of let the arrangement part be the focus of my attention. Whereas with a bit more maturity, I could probably rely more on certain sections and say, okay, for the next, 8 bars, I'm going to create a breakdown where I mute the kick and I don't do anything except fuck with the effects on the OB6. Or I will focus on the sample and like maybe play with the sample in a performative way. Obviously it's hard because like I'm not in a room with other people, but I think that's probably where things are going to head. It's going to be a little bit more interactive, a little bit more playful, a little bit less like tight-knit, or at least a little bit less uptight. That's the word. All right, well, that's everything that I can think of at this moment. If you have any thoughts, opinions, please let me know. I make these sets with the intention of eventually playing them for people, so if you listen to the whole thing and you're like, I really didn't like that, yeah, sure, let me know. I may or may not agree with you, but that's the beauty of online discussion. So in any case, I hope that you've at least learned something if you didn't enjoy it. And if you have any questions about what was going on, definitely leave me a comment. I love sort of explaining those things. And honestly, through that, I often find revelations about things that I had done that I might not have even noticed. In any case, if you see something cool that you like, leave a comment and ask me how I did it, and it'll help me sort of reinforce like what that was so that I can do it more often. All right, well, thanks again for watching, and see you guys next week.